Hi, this is Jeff Blauette, technical agronomist with Cooperative Farmers Elevator, and on this week's Field Friday segment, I thought I'd kind of talk about what's going to be coming up here real quick. We've got some of this crop is really rapidly maturing. We got a lot of stuff to be aware of here right as we start pulling into these fields. I know we're all kind of waiting for the beans to kind of finish up and get ready here, and that's coming. We'll have that starting to get really busy probably here in the next week or two, but we need to be aware of what's going on out in these cornfields. There's a lot of things going on, and none of those are going to be good for standability. Seems like we talk about that every year, be aware of your corn standability, but again, this is another year where we have to be aware of that. If we think about how the season went this year, we planted a lot of corn, early, not super early in most cases, but we did have an awful lot of corn planted, and it was pretty cool soil temperatures. We were decent temperatures during the day, but it got pretty chilly at night, kept those soil temperatures low, and some of that corn took a long time to kind of emerge and kind of get going out of the ground. Oftentimes when that happens, we end up with having some corn that ends up taking on some stress. It doesn't really manifest itself till later on in the season, and we end up with something here towards the end called crown rot. We've talked about that many times before, but I've got a picture here of what that looks like. You can kind of see when that plant just gets enough disease in that crown and then it gets to the end of grain fill here, some plants will just kind of shut down. The disease kind of shuts down that root system, and when that happens, that stalk cannibalizes and the stalk standability really goes downhill in a hurry. You can see in this picture that there's a nice ear on this plant. It filled out nice. It may be shut down a little bit before it was done with grain fill, but it's a decent sized ear, so it's not a spindly little plant, but it's going to need to be harvested on time. You can see what the stalk quality is on this one from what it looks like in the split. So then obviously beyond that, we got the corn out of the ground. We started to get really dry. We didn't have a lot of moisture in May, but June got really hot and dry. We had a lot of problems that caused. If we're not able to take up nutrients because we're not sucking up water because it's too dry, we don't have the ability to take up nitrogen or potassium very well when that corn plant's in that really dry environment and is struggling for uptake. So that caused a couple of problems. I've got some pictures here of, or a picture of a corn plant that's got nitrogen deficiency all the way up to the top of the plant. That's not good. That plant's kind of been short all year, and even with some of the late rains, it still has some cannibalization symptoms towards the top, a leaf or two above the ear. That's not going to help standability on that plant. And then the other unique thing that I've never seen before, and I haven't really been able to have anybody give me any good explanation, but we've got these corn plants that are green, rind, they look healthy as far as we can tell, but you can see how they're a gradual bend. They're kind of bent over like a willow tree, you might say, and I don't know why that's happening. We have some fields with some of that. It's in pockets and some hybrids. I can't really pin it down to why. The only thing I can think of is that dry period that we had. When soils get really dry, they hold on to the potassium particles really tightly in those clay layers that are in all of our soils, and that potassium is super important at that time from that corn when it goes, when that corn really grows really rapidly, that grand growth phase we call it. And when it's doing that, if it can't take up enough potassium is what builds that plant, that rind strength. And I wonder if we have a lesser amount of potassium to not build the lignin in that stalk as well as it normally does, and it's kind of lazy. My fear is those plants aren't going to stand back up. They look fine today. They're like a gradually bent green, healthy looking stalk yet, but they are not going to stand back up. And as they die and dry, they're going to kink. That concerns me in some of these fields and some of these situations. So that's something that was a ramification of our dry June and so on, I think. And then the final thing that we have is, in some of these fields, a lot of you have probably driven by fields that were down pretty bad. We had a lot of rootworm feeding this year, especially in the corn on corn. It didn't really matter. Some of these fields had so much pressure, whether it was traits, whether it was insecticide in furrow, or some fields even had both, and we still had some fairly significant feeding. And we had a lot of corn that didn't have a lot of a root system going down. Obviously, a lesser root system, it struggles to take up a lot of things, and you can see some of those are really struggled, and they've already kinked over or root lodged, and those plants are really going to be difficult to harvest as well. So all these things are going to cause some harvest issues on this corn, and especially as it goes forward, we need to be aware of which fields have the most issues, and we may need to take those out a little earlier. We do have corn that's getting a little bit, past black layer now, some of the earlier stuff. I think with this warm weather we've got, we're early enough where we'll have stuff drying in the field fairly rapidly, but we're probably in some of these fields, we're not going to want to wait till it's 17% to take them out. I know we'd all like to, we don't like paying a drying bill, but as we look at some of these situations, we're one windstorm away from having a problem here in a week or two, and I think we need to be aware of which fields are in those situations so we don't leave a bunch of corn out in the field and have a lot of harvest struggles. So just wanted you to be aware. Most of you guys probably are, but there's things going on out there that are pretty severe in some cases. We need to be aware of that so we can prioritize harvesting some of these fields. And if we got some bean fields that are out and we're waiting for the next ones to get dry enough, we may want to consider on some of these fields throwing the corn head on and taking some acres of corn out to make harvest go a little easier and that. So just wanted to touch on a few of those things, some situations that are going on out there to make you aware, and just so we can have a more successful fall. With that, that's this week's Field Friday segment, and we'll see you next week.